Hello and welcome back to the Wasteland, everybody. Welcome back to New Vegas, where today we're going to be taking a look at the Mantis Gauntlet and its unique variant. A very strange weapon that is pretty much just unique to New Vegas. I don't know of any of the other Fallout games that have at least a weapon quite like this. There are some other ones that have like the Deathclaw Gauntlet, which are at least kind of similar, and even New Vegas has that, as well as the Yaogwai Gauntlet. But this is a little bit different to have the actual Mantis Blade Gauntlet. So this is going to be kind of a rare weapon to find in New Vegas. Not a whole lot of vendors actually sell this. You can find it on a couple of them. Sometimes you can buy this from like Mick and Ralph's. The unique one you actually buy from Mick and Ralph as well, so that's kind of cool. You can buy it from a couple other places. You might see a few enemies actually carrying this around. You're more likely to find this in a DLC like Zion, though, where the White Legs might actually be carrying Mantis gauntlets around, and they also like to put venom on their gauntlets, which is kind of nasty. So this isn't a super common weapon to find, but it is definitely a very unique one. The Mantis Gauntlet requires 75 unarmed and 4 strength to wield. 75 unarmed is pretty high, but if you're doing an unarmed build, you're probably going to have a lot. 4 strength is super easy to get, and I think every unarmed build is going to go with at least 4 strength, if not more than 4 strength, probably up to like 7 or 8 strength. Well, all you technically need is 7 to get to 10, but regardless, pretty achievable to get. The Mantis Gauntlet does 30 damage per hit, which is pretty decent. This also does 61 damage per second. It doesn't attack the fastest out of the melee or unarmed weapons, but it attacks fairly quick, so that's pretty nice. This one does 30 crit damage, so same as regular damage. One thing that separates the Mantis Gauntlet from other unarmed, though, is that this has a 3 times crit modifier, which is really high. That's really good. So if you have high luck, you're more likely to hit crits with this. That's fantastic. Only costs 22 action points to use, making it really good in a VATS build. This does weigh 10, surprisingly. It's actually very heavy, but it's heavy enough to actually count towards heavyweight too, which is weird. Most unarmed weapons don't count that high, and it actually makes it go down to a pretty reasonable weight at 5. And this one has 50 item health. The item health of the Mantis Gauntlet is pretty low, and it can break fairly fast. I guess that kind of makes sense. I do wish that this weapon was a fashionable weapon, like you could fashion it yourself, to where you could actually get Mantis forelimbs, and after you've collected so many of them, or maybe only giant Mantis forelimbs, or I guess just any of the full-grown Mantises, you could make your own gauntlet out of this. But sadly, you can't do that, and you do need to find other Mantis gauntlets to fix this, or you're going to need weapon repair kits or something like jury rigging, which will make the health not really that much of an issue for this weapon. For the pros of the Mantis Gauntlet, this one does actually do pretty good damage and pretty good damage per second. It also has great crits, so hitting crits is pretty good with this. It feels pretty nice to use this overall. It's a pretty decent unarmed weapon towards the mid and end game. If you can get one early on, that's even better. The cons to this weapon are that this weapon is heavy. It weighs 10, or the unique one weighs 12. So this is actually pretty heavy, but heavyweight does actually cut that in half, so it could go down to 5 or 6 weight, which isn't too bad. It has low item HP, but again, if you have weapon repair kits or jury rigging, that's not necessarily an issue. And this is pretty rare. You're not going to find these just on regular random people in the Mojave. They just don't have them unless you have mods installed, which give enemies more weapon variety. But yeah, these ones are extremely rare. I think the only enemies that I at least can recall using them are like the White Legs in Zion, so you can take them off of them, but you're going to have to be at a certain level to get those too, which I think is level 20 or 30 to when they start spawning with those weapons, since those are considered like end game unarmed weapons. So it does have some downsides to it. There are also quite a lot of perks that can help with this. Basically all of them that are really good for unarmed and melee are really good for this one. It doesn't have any specific perk to it, but heavyweight can help. It cuts its weight in half. We've already talked about that. Piercing strike is fantastic because it just gives you armor piercing, which is pretty fitting for the Mantis Gauntlet. The Mantises themselves, I believe, have armor piercing or armor negation similar to the Death Claws, but I don't think the Mantis Glove actually has that by default, so Piercing Strike is pretty nice. If I'm incorrect about that, then Piercing Strike is less useful for this one. It would still be good for an unarmed or a melee build, but it wouldn't really help this one at all, since it already punches through armor if that's the case. Slayer's fantastic because it gets you faster attack speed, so that's always good for any sort of melee or unarmed weapon. Super Slam's fantastic because you can knock enemies down, and if they're knocked down, it's really easy to punch them while they're on the ground. And then Purifier's great because it makes it so you get more damage towards abominations, and if you're going with an unarmed or melee build, that just means you're going to get more damage towards big things like super mutants and Deathclaws, so fantastic. Overall, the Mantis Gauntlet, I think I'm going to put into like the high B tier. I think it's a pretty solid weapon overall. It's not necessarily one of my go-to melee or unarmed weapons, because by the time I'm getting it, you honestly have just about everything that you could have unlocked. Whether you're going for a very specific melee or unarmed weapon, like a unique version of it, something like Knock Knock or something like that, or you could just have something that's generic and strong, like a Ballistic Fist. So this one I don't find myself using all that much, but it is definitely a cool and unique weapon, and I don't think it's bad at all. It's just it comes at kind of an awkward time in the game. We also need to talk about the unique version of the Mantis Gauntlet too. This is called Embrace the Mantis King, and this one is pretty cool. This one is added with the Gunrunner's Arsenal DLC, so you do need to have that. You need to buy this from Mick and Ralph, which is kind of unique. They actually sell 2 unique weapons, this one and Little Devil, which we haven't actually talked about Little Devil in a video like this. But Embrace the Mantis King is one of those weapons that you can buy. Since it is a buyable weapon and a named weapon, that does mean that it's going to be expensive, but it's not necessarily the most expensive thing. This is going to cost you about 10 to 12,000 caps. Still pricey, much pricier than a normal weapon, but maybe not a huge investment compared to some of them like Two-Step Goodbye, which is easily like double or maybe even triple. I think it's double this price. So it's not the most expensive thing in the game, but it is kind of expensive. This one does look a little bit different than the regular Mantis Glove, and it does actually have some more bonuses to it than the regular Mantis Glove does too. So this one also requires 75 unarmed and 4 strength to wield. Not such a big deal there. This one has 42 damage on it, which is pretty good. That's more than the regular one. Only 66 damage per second. The Embrace the Mantis King actually attacks a little bit slower than regular Mantis Gauntlets do. It's not noticeably slower, but it is a little bit slower in terms of DPS, so you're not going to be doing as much with it as the regular one, at least if you need to hit something multiple times or hitting multiple enemies in quick succession. There is something that is very different about this though, and that is that its crit damage is much higher than its regular damage, which is pretty awesome. If you hit a crit with the Embrace the Mantis King, this deals 64 damage on hit. That is very high. That's almost as high as like a brush gun hitting them. So that's pretty nice. This still keeps its 3 times crit modifier too, so hitting those crits is pretty easy, and that makes it so your damage and damage per second will jump up quite a bit when you are hitting those crits. This one does cost a little bit more action points at 25, which is still good for a VATS build, but I don't know why it's higher than the regular Mantis Gauntlet. This one does weigh more than a regular Mantis Gauntlet at 12, so you can cut it in half by heavyweight and go down to 6. And this one does have more item HP, but it still doesn't have a whole lot of item HP. It has 80 item HP, which is, I think, the same as the Power Fist, so it's going to break as fast as that, which is still kind of fast, but at least it's not as quick as the 50 health that the regular Mantis Gauntlet has. This one, you could argue, is one of the most underrated weapons in all of Fallout New Vegas. A part of that might just be because not a whole lot of people realize it exists, and you have to go to Mick and Ralph to buy it. I think you also need to have their secret shop opened up, which requires like a 40 guns check. I think, or maybe it's a 30 guns check. Either way, that does grant you access to more weapons that they can be selling, so that's pretty cool. And if you want to use this one, it's actually a pretty solid overall unarmed weapon. I would put Embrace the Mantis King all the way up into A tier. I think it's really good. The only thing kind of holding it back are like its weight is kind of awkward, unless you're running heavyweight, and then it's not so much. Even then, you could argue that it's not really that big of a deal because unarmed doesn't really need to be carrying around a whole lot of weight, even on hardcore, since you're not carrying around bullets if you're going with it exclusively unarmed build, and its item health is a little bit low, but again, you could argue that away too if you have like jury rigging or weapon repair kits, in which case it's not that big of a deal. Both these are really good weapons. They're pretty solid overall unarmed weapons. I wouldn't necessarily consider them the strongest, but they are pretty high up there. They're like Embrace the Mantis King is definitely in the top 10 of unarmed weapons. So tell me your thoughts on the Mantis Gauntlet and Embrace the Mantis King. How do you enjoy using these? Have you used these? And what other weapons would you like to see in this list? I'm going to be covering all of them in New Vegas, so tell me what you would like to see. Thanks everybody for this suggestion. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye everybody!